this world is a funny old thing, isn't it? There's certain things we can rely on. There are certain things which are constant. There are certain things which are always true. I think this morning we saw something of that in the pencils through the bag. We perhaps weren't expecting that, but I'm sure there was science going on there. Steve, it wasn't actually magic, folks. I think it was some science about surface tension and all those things. There's things we can expect. If we drop something, we let go of something, it's going to go down. Gravity's going to pull it down. We expect that. And if it's a slice of toast, you can almost guarantee it's going to fall butter side down. There are certain inevitabilities, certain constancies. You can guarantee it's a beautiful day today. If any of you are planning a barbecue this afternoon, I'm holding you accountable for when it rains. Because you can guarantee if you plan a barbecue, it's going to rain. There's certain things we can take comfort in predictability. One of those things we don't necessarily take comfort in, but we know is true. And that's that, dead people stay dead. Gravity is real. There are certain things that happen, and dead people stay dead. And that's what the women in our reading expected, didn't they? We saw there in verse 1, on the first day of the week at early dawn, they went to the tomb. They'd seen Jesus die. They'd seen him nailed to a cross. They'd seen the nails driven through his palms and through his feet. The death of a crucifixion is one of suffocation, of asphyxiation. You can't breathe. They'd seen him die and they expected him to be there. We see that. They rose early. As I said, they couldn't go on the Saturday. They had to observe the rules of the Sabbath. But they went early because they wanted to make sure they got there before the rot got too bad. They went early. He was dead. They took spices with them. These were spices that would preserve the body, and it was a loving thing to do, a ritual they would do to the bodies then to stop them from smelling so bad in a warm climate. But they took those spices because he was dead. They're expecting him to be dead. Not only did they take the spices, but they had to prepare them. They prepared the spices. They'd prepared for the inevitable. We'll spend time doing this because, he's dead. People prepare for the inevitable, don't we? We prepare for things we know are going to happen. And they had seen him dead. And dead people stay dead. And that's what we see in the world, don't we? We see a world of death. I don't know if you've ever done the maths on this. Just something to think about. But did you know that the chances of winning the lottery are 1 in 45 million? 1 in 45 million. The chances of being struck by lightning are much better. 1 in 300,000. And the chance of dying is, it's about 1 in 1. It's the one overruling statistic, doesn't it? That 1 in 1 people die. We know this. We know this to be true. We see it in our own lives. We see it in the lives of the people we love. 1 in 1 people die. It's the ultimate enemy. It's the final enemy. It's the biggest, it's the baddest problem that we face. Death. And I think that's something, a part of the reason why we're slightly obsessed with it. We're obsessed with death. More and more to the point, we're obsessed with great stories where death is beaten. We love those stories where things seem so dire, they seem like they're going to be the worst, and yet there's a chance that death is going to be beaten. We see it in the great stories in The Lord of the Rings. We have this great motif of Gandalf, who it seems it's lost. He faces the Balrog. He falls to his death. And yet he rises from that death in the story to go on and continue leading the fellowship to victory. We see it in the Harry Potter stories. We see this motif of he's dead. It's all done. And the bad guy's going to win. Voldemort, death is going to win. But then the great thing is that from that death rises a hero who defeats death and life wins. We love these stories, don't we? I'm going to reference it again later on because you know I love it. But Star Wars, I know. Rach said I wasn't allowed to wear a Star Wars t-shirt this morning, so I've got this pink one on. But that's what's fascinating well, I don't really like to talk about the first three because they don't really count. But you know the bit where Anakin, he's obsessed with, he's told by Palpatine that there is this way of, if you control the Force, you can bring about life from the dead. And he's so obsessed with this idea that he could save the one he loves, this idea that he could save his mother, that he could control death, that he goes to the dark side. But there's an obsession with life beating death. And I think there's something in that with, I don't know if it's just me, but there's this whole obsession with zombie films and programs. And that might not be your thing, and that's fine. But this idea that, well, after death, there's something, whether it's reanimated or what. And the survivors, well, they're trying to fight these dead ones, this death. Life beating death is the greatest story. And we see it throughout all great literature, great books, and great comics and films. And we see it in the natural world as well, don't we? We see this idea that, well, things die, but if animals can just, if things can just pass on their genes, if they can be the biggest, if they can be the strongest, if they can pass on their genes to the next generation, well, somehow they carry on. Their strength continues. All creation is fighting to live, and we do it as humans too, don't we? We want to set up our kids if we have them. We want to set them up well, somehow that they would remember us and we would set them up for life. That although death may take us, we want to leave them a nice nest egg or a home or something so that our life hasn't been for nothing. But 1 in 1 people die. Death reigns. Death is king over this world outside of Jesus. And we feel that, don't we? We see it. We only have to turn on the news and we see that death is all around, that people are fighting and killing each other, and, well, if I can't get what I want, well, I'll kill. That's the way the world goes. We feel it in our own lives, whether it be in our illnesses, in our bereavements, in our relationships breaking down. We see it in our own hearts. We know that sometimes there are those times where we hate our neighbour and we almost wish, we might not go through with it, but we wish they were dead. We hate them. Death reigns, and we hate it. We should. But what if somebody beat death? What if somebody beat death? Well, that would change everything. That would change everything. It would mean that death is no longer the strongest thing, the most powerful thing. We read in verses 2 to 6 here, I'm just going to read them through. They were expecting to get to the tomb. They were expecting to find a dead body. And when they got there, they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. And when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. They were angels. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, Why? Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. He is risen. Jesus conquered death. And so this changes everything. That's what we're going to see, that Jesus rising changes everything. It would be, we can't almost imagine it. It'd be like the expectation of dropping something, expecting it to go to the ground, but it just shoots up and sits on the ceiling. The world has been turned upside down. The world has been changed. What was certain is no longer certain. An undefeated foe, a foe, death. Nobody has ever beaten death, and yet Jesus does. The world reigning champion has been defeated. The finality of death has been reversed, has been removed. It's no longer the final thing. You see, what we see is that where we thought in this world that death reigns, we see that there is actually life offered. We read this in another bit of the Bible that says, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" The power of death has been conquered, and life wins over death. There is no victory for death. There is no sting. No fangs. It is defanged. It is all bark and no bite now that Christ has risen. Let me suggest to you that I don't know all of you. I don't know what you've got going on in your lives. But let me suggest death is the worst thing you will ever face. Death is the worst thing you'll ever face. Because the Bible tells us that outside of God, death is not just the process we go through, but what happens afterwards, an eternal death. And it is the worst thing. We feel that in our lives when we grieve. We get a small taste of that when we hurt and we're ill. But death is the worst thing. But the worst thing that can happen to you has been reversed, has been defeated. So all those other things which are bad in your life, they are not the worst thing. The worst thing has been defeated. And so those other things are put into that light of, well, if Christ can defeat death, well then, he's got me. And so given that Christ has risen, given that death has been reversed, the angels say to the women, they ask them, why do you seek the living among the dead? It's a great question, isn't it? I mean, to them it seems so obvious. Jesus had been telling the disciples about this, but they hadn't quite got it yet. But the angels ask, why are you looking for life? Why are you looking for the thing that gives life among the dead, among the tombs? Guys, this is where dead things are. Why are you looking here? You see, that's this world, isn't it? This world is, as we've said, it's full of dead things. Everything ultimately dies. Everything ultimately breaks. And yet we spend so much of our time looking for life here. That's what we do. We could maybe, rather than life, we could talk about fulfillment, a full life. We want a full experience, and we're looking for that. We feel an emptiness in us that we want filled, and we look around this world looking for life, looking for something which is going to mean something for us and hold us on and fill us up. And it might be good things that we look to. We might look to family. Family is important. It is. But it's never going to completely fulfill us. We might look to knowledge. Well, if I can just know enough, that'll be a life well spent. If I can amass enough stuff, enough wealth that will see me through, that'll make sure I'm comfortable, that'll make sure that anybody I love afterwards is comfortable. If I can have a good career and make a name for myself and at least feel like I've done something to leave my mark on the world, whether it's relationships and love, whether it's food, whether it's things that we enjoy, whether it's entertainment and leisure. And you know what? All of those things, none of them are bad. All of them are good in their right place. All of them are God-given things. In their right place, they are good, but they don't last, do they? They don't last. All of those things, family, wealth, career, knowledge, relationships, food, leisure, even helping people. Do you know what? You're thinking, well, do you know what, Doug? That whole list of stuff is about you. I commit my life to helping others. But I still don't need Jesus. I find fulfillment in helping others. Do you know what? Even that doesn't last. People are going to forget you. The people you help will need help again. And what we're doing there is all of it is broken and tainted by death. All of those things do not last. We are looking for life among dead things. That's what we do when we look for life outside of Jesus. But the good news is the angels say, why do you seek the living among the dead? Why do you look for life among the tombs? Because it's futile here. But there's good news, because he's risen. He's not here. He's not here. He's risen. There is life to be found, but you won't find it among these defeated things. And that is the great message of Easter and of the church and of the scriptures that we get to proclaim this morning and every day. This call to remember that the women receive. Look at the end of verse 6. The angels say to them, he's not here, but he is risen. Remember how he told you whilst he was still alive, whilst he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and crucified, and on the third day rise. They are called to remember something. What they're called to remember in that one sentence in verse 7 is the gospel. The gospel. Gospel is just a word that means good news. They're called to remember the good news. And the good news is this, that Jesus was first delivered. He was delivered. Some translations say he was handed over. But do you see, in that language, do you see what's happening there? Jesus wasn't taken. He wasn't strong-armed. He wasn't beaten down and made to come. He was delivered. He was handed over by the Father. By himself, willingly he went. In fact, we read that the reason for that is because it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. This wasn't plan B. In Revelation, we read that it was part of God's plan from the very beginning. He says, "And all who dwell on earth will worship everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain." Before the foundation of the world, names were written in the Lamb's book of life. The Lamb is Jesus. His book of life is his salvation. It was not plan B. Jesus willingly went to the cross. The Father willingly gave his own Son. He wasn't taken, he was delivered. The second thing we see is that he was crucified. He was crucified at the hands of sinful men. He was delivered and he was crucified. I'm sure you all know a bit about crucifixion. It's not something they did to good people. Crucifixion was something that was reserved not only for criminals, but for the most criminal of the criminal, the lawbreakers. It was a public execution. It was shaming. Everybody knew about it. Jesus was crucified. He died the death of a lawbreaker. And do you know what? The thing was, he wasn't. You read through the accounts and it's very clear they can bring no charge against him. And yet he's crucified because the people were sinful and they wanted to. But we're lawbreakers. We are sinners. That's the word the Bible uses. We do things which are against God and we do things which are for ourselves, and that's our death he took on the cross. He took the sinner's death, and that's me this morning. And whether or not you want to admit it, it is you. I am a sinner. I'm saved by grace. Jesus, though he didn't have to, took my place on the cross. Sin, the Bible tells us, sin cuts us off from God. And what Jesus did on the cross is he took upon himself our cut offness. He became cut off in our place. But if it stops there, the gospel stops there at the cross, then we're going to say, great, so what? Jesus is dead. I am going to die too. He's dead too. Death still wins. Where's the good news in this? Well, the good news is that final part of verse 7. And on the third day, he will rise. The gospel is nothing without the resurrection. The Bible itself says that in a book of Corinthians. It says, "And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain." If Christ isn't risen today, I'm just blowing hot air. And some of you think I'm doing that anyway. But I'm just blowing hot air. If Christ isn't risen, then what's the point? We don't have any hope. Our faith is useless. Without the resurrection, there is nothing. But Jesus rose again. And that's important because that tells us that he not only died, but he rose beating death, defeating death. Death couldn't hold him. He crushed death. There's a wonderful, right in the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, where Adam and Eve, they sin and they turn away from God. And right there at the beginning, in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, verse 15, we have this great promise from God. He says to Adam and Eve, he says, "I will put enmity, I will put division, I will put war between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring." He's speaking to the devil here. "And between your offspring and her offspring, he shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel." There's this great promise that Jesus is going to come. The seed of the woman is going to come through mankind. And he's going to not bruise it, but crush the head of Satan. Yeah, Satan's going to bruise his heel. It's going to hurt. It's not going to be good. That's what we see on the cross. Clearly he was bruised, but he wasn't crushed. He came back to life. But Satan is crushed. There is fulfillment of that first promise in the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection changes everything. It changes everything. Before the resurrection, there was a world where death clearly reigned. Nobody had beaten it before. Death reigned. And so if you live in a world without Jesus, you're living in a world where death reigns. And so you live in a world where, you only live once. We perhaps hear that phrase, "Oh, why not? Let's do it. We only live once." And so, if you only live once, it makes sense that you're going to want to pursue certain things. You're going to be devastated when your body starts to break and it starts to get old, it starts to ache or get ill, because, well, you only live once and this is all I've got. So you're going to pursue health. You only live once, so you want to do all the things you want to do in this one life you have, so you're going to pursue wealth. You're going to do things which make you happy, things that are important to you. Even those things, like I said, even doing good for others, you can pursue those things in a selfish way. Well, I want to make a mark. I want people to remember me. You're going to pursue certain experiences. I promised another one was coming, and here it is. Anybody seen the trailer for The Last Jedi this week? I know some of you have. Yeah. So the next Star Wars is coming out at Christmas, and I'm quite excited for it. 2 years ago, The Force Awakens came out. And it was huge. It had been ages since we'd had a Star Wars film, and there was this really... It was hailed as a touching story, but I thought it was a really sad story. Some of you might have heard it about this man called Daniel Fleetwood. He was a younger man, and he was diagnosed with cancer. And he was a massive Star Wars fan. So he contacted J.J. Abrams, and he contacted Disney. He was like, look, I'm going to die before the film comes out. That's my prognosis. I'm going to die before the film comes out. And my dying wish, I will die satisfied if you can let me see that film before it comes out. Yeah? And they did, and you know what? It's nice. It's good that they did that. But I think it's sad. Don't get me wrong, I was looking forward to the film. I'm looking forward to the film in December, but do you know what? If I die before then, that won't be my concern. This is serious. To some people, this is life. These things are held up as important, but they don't last. They're not important. That's all he had to look forward to, was seeing that film. And so if Jesus hasn't risen, if you live in a world where death reigns, then it becomes all about satisfaction. It becomes about you. It becomes about getting what you want, whether that be doing good things or not, but it's about doing the things that you want to do before it is all over. But if we live in the resurrection, all of that's turned upside down. It changes everything. The resurrection frees us. We are freed from that way of thinking. We are freed from the fear of death. I'm not scared to die. I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not going to embrace the process of death. But when it comes, I'm not scared. Because Jesus has me. Death has been defeated. And though I may walk through it, it is not going to be my final experience. Death still exists, but it's not ultimate. It's a comma in the sentence of life rather than a full stop. It's a point on the journey, if you can put it that way. It's not the destination for those who are in Christ. But if you don't have Jesus, then for many it will be the final destination. For many, if you don't know Jesus, it will be the full stop of your life, death. Jesus, we read, he does die. He goes down into that death. He embraces that death. And he punches through that death. He makes a great big hole in it. And he stands on the other side and he beckons us to come through. It's safe. I've done it. There is life when you come through the door that is me. We may live lives that are full of pain. We may live lives that are full of suffering. We may die a painful death. But in Christ, we hear that there is good news. We hear in the end that those who are with Jesus heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God." Well, what does that mean? It means he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, grieving, crying, or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. Resurrection changes everything. There's no you only live once in Jesus. I'm going to live again. And that forever. And we don't only have, it's not only a future thing that Jesus promises us, but it begins now. We read in John's Gospel that he lays down his life for the sheep. that we may have life and have it abundantly. So it's not just future, it's now. He's died so that we may know him and have a fullness of life now. We're not singing it today, but I know many of you will know the song, and the chorus goes, I'm not going to sing it, don't worry. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Living, knowing that the resurrection is true, means we live that life now to its fullness. There's no fear. And the third verse talks about that final day. And then one day I'll cross the river. I'll die. I'll go to be with him. I'll fight life's final war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory and I'll know he lives. This is the hope of the resurrection. I haven't spoken to our worship leaders about this before, but we sang that song about 4 or 5 times around the time last year when my nana was ill and she was dying, and every single time I was sat there in the pews and I was just bawling like a baby. And it was not because I was sad, but it wasn't ultimately because I was sad. It's because I knew as I sang these words that those things were true of my nana in York, where she was in a hospital bed. Because she was the Lord's. She knew the Lord. She trusted him. And I knew that she was fighting a final war with pain, and it was horrible. But as death gave way to victory, I know that she was greeted in the arms of Jesus because he lives. And so I can face tomorrow. All fear is gone. And this is true this morning for our dear sisters Eileen and Ethel. They're not here. Their bodies are dead. But they're with Jesus. And when he returns, he's going to bring them to fullness of life, bodily resurrected again. He is risen, and it changes everything. We're told in Romans, if we have been united with him in a death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. That is our ultimate joy and glory. Not just that Jesus has risen, but in him we shall too. He has gone before us, and we will follow. That just leaves me with a couple of things to say. As we think about that, we hear this morning from the scriptures, we hear from the testimony of Christ, we hear from the testimony of this body that he is risen. He is not here. He is not dead, but he is risen. And the question that I put to all of you and to myself is, how do we respond to that? How do we respond? We see 2 responses here. We'll see 3 responses, 2 types of responses here in Scripture. The first one of the women. They hear the gospel. They're told to remember, and they remembered his words. They heard, and turning from the tomb, they told all those things to the 11 and to the rest. They heard, they believed, and they responded, and they told it again. And in verse 12, we see that Peter, he heard the report. He rose, he believed, he responded, he ran to the tomb. And then he left, went home, marveling at what had happened. And just as we read that bit about Peter going home and marveling about what had happened, it just takes us back to the beginning of Luke's gospel, when we hear about the shepherds who come and see the birth of Jesus, and they return rejoicing. There's these 2 beautiful bookends to Christ's earthly life, where people marveled at what he'd done, because he's unlike any other. There's one response. We hear, we believe, and we respond. Or, in verse 11, we see another response. This is the women speaking to the apostles, to the disciples. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. There may be some of you this morning who think, oh, do you know, it's an idle tale. It's nonsense. It can't be proved, and I don't want to believe it. On a side note, I would just urge you to look at the information. Look at the 4 facts of Easter. If you want to know more about that, come speak to me afterwards. Don't dismiss it out of hand. Blind dismissal is as stupid as blind belief. Come and talk to me about it. But don't feel bad, because you know what? These guys here said it was an idle tale. They were the disciples. They were the apostles who'd been with Jesus. And so we take some hope from this, that we are reminded that everyone who has ever believed in the resurrection of Jesus at some point didn't believe. I'm not saying everybody's rejected it first, but we all come from a point where we don't believe it or we don't know it, and then we hear it, and many have come to believe this to be true. We see in John 11, Jesus talking to a woman, and he says these words to her. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die, shall never die." Do you believe this? When Jesus talks about the resurrection, he gives the lesson. He says, do you believe this? This isn't academic. This isn't just for your head. This demands a response. And this morning you need to respond to it. And if you say, well, I'm not going to respond, that is a response. You're rejecting it. This demands a response. If you've ever been scared of death, if you've ever been angry at death, I have. I'm sure many of us have. If you've ever been terrified of death, then these 12 verses, the resurrection, is good news for you. It's good news for me. We needn't fear. We needn't cower. We needn't be dictated to by death. Death is the worst. Death is the worst. And it's powerful. But it isn't God. It isn't all powerful. And death, do you know what? Death isn't God's fault. Death isn't on God. It's on us. We reject God, and we therefore reject the life that he offers. In Adam, we have been taken away from God, and in ourselves we continue that. We see it in our lives. We reject God and we turn away from him. And we turn away from the life he offers, and we wonder why things go bad. It's not God's fault. But God does everything to reverse it. He has done everything to reverse death because he loves you. Because he loves me. He gave his life. He gave his son. Death in the world is not a reason to doubt Jesus. Death in the world is not a reason to doubt the resurrection. It is every reason to believe it and to trust in him. I'm just going to close with one more verse, which is just glorious in Revelation. This should give us hope. This is John as he sees the revelation of Jesus. And he says, he sees Jesus. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, "Fear not, for I am the first and the last." Listen to this bit. I am the living one. I died. I am the living one, although I died. And behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Jesus, death is defanged. He has the keys to it. He has the authority over it, and he has conquered it. And that is the truth that is real in my life. It's real in the life of many of us here this morning, and can be made real in your life this morning if you'll trust in him, if you'll turn to him. And if you want to know more about what that means, if you've got questions, come and speak to me afterwards. I'd love to talk to you about any of this. Jesus has risen, and it changes everything. Amen.